You're listening to the Scale and Culture podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. Our guest today is Chester Elton. He's a #1 New York Times bestselling business author and an organizational culture, employee engagement, and leadership expert. He's been called the Apostle of Appreciation by Canada's Globe and Mail, creative and refreshing by the New York Times, and a must-read for modern managers by CNN. Chester is co-author of the multiple award-winning best-selling leadership books, including All In, The Carrot Principle, Leading with Gratitude, and Anxiety at Work. His books have been translated in 30 languages and have sold 1.6 million copies worldwide. Chester's often quoted in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Fast Company, and the New York Times. He's appeared on NBC's Today, CNN, ABC, MSNBC, National Public Radio, and CBS's 60 Minutes, and now also on the Scale and Culture podcast. Also, Chester is the co-founder of The Culture Works and a board member of Camp Corral, a nonprofit for the children of wounded and fallen military heroes. He served as a leadership consultant and coach to firms such as American Express, the World Bank, Zoox, Momofuku, and the New Jersey Devils of the NHL. In this episode of Scaling Culture, Ron and Chester discuss what's driving Chester to write these books, the random act of kindness and the ripple effect, anxiety at work and strategies how leaders can spot it, normalize it, and make it safe to talk about, and gratitude stones, humility, empathy, vulnerability, mental health, and how to lead with gratitude. This episode was sponsored by Empyrean, a top-tier HR technology company that empowers organizations to build a better culture by connecting employees to meaningful, life-enriching benefits. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Culture podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lovett, and today I'm very, very excited to have Chester Elton with us. Chester, welcome to the show.
Always a pleasure, Ron. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you again.
Yeah, always fun.
So Chester, we did a full intro, but I know you go by the Apostle of Appreciation. I love that. What does it mean? Break that down.
So Adrian Gostick's my co-author. We've been writing together now for over 20 years. And the first 7 books we wrote all had carrot in the title. You know, it was all about a recognition and appreciation. Well, our seminal book is called The Carrot Principle. We published it with Simon & Schuster and did very, very, very well. And Adrian and I both grew up in Canada. So the Toronto Globe and Mail, which is Canada's largest newspaper, did a review of the book. And the reviewer called us, said, Gostick and Elton are the apostles of appreciation. And we liked it so much, we just kept it. You know, it's always better for someone else to give you the title.
Right.
I will tell you, Ron, another title we got that we didn't keep, but it was just clever, was a guy called us the Dalai Lamas of workplace traumas.
That actually rhymes. Of workplace traumas. Oh, that's good.
No, it was very clever. It was very clever.
That's kind of a rap song. I like that. That's very good. So, Chester, I want to kick off. You know, again, Maddie's done a phenomenal intro of you, but give us just an insight, a deeper insight of who is Chester Elton.
Well, that's kind of like asking somebody, what's the meaning of life, isn't it? I mean,
that'll be next. So prepare yourself.
You know, great question. I'm the son of John Dalton Elton and Irene Tanner Elton. You know, I just spent some time with 3 of my older brothers. We went on this bike and boat trip in the Netherlands. And it's so interesting that I grew up in a family with 5 boys, and I'm the youngest of the 5 boys. And when we talk about our identities, it's really interesting. It always comes back to our dad. My father, John Dalton Elton, was just remarkable in so many ways. He had a beautiful bass voice. He sounded like Bing Crosby. My mother played the piano for him. He was quite the entertainer. He ran radio stations. He started as an announcer, and then he got into management. And my dad was just one of those guys where, after being with my dad, you felt better about yourself, as one of the best ways to describe him. You know, some people you meet them and you say, boy, they're the most interesting person I've ever met. After you spent time with my dad, you'd say, you know what? I'm the most interesting person I've ever met. I mean, he just had a way of making people feel good about themselves. And so that's the way I grew up. You know, I tell people I grew up in a ridiculously happy household. My parents were married for 65 years. I never, ever heard my father raise his voice to my mother. ever. It was one of the great love stories of all time. I'll share with you. And this is very much who I am and my older brothers. I'll never forget, I was sitting in church with my dad one day, and my mother was a model. She just always dressed to the nines and dressed my dad to the nines. They were always, well turned out. And my mother walked into the room and my dad nudged me and he said, "Chess, look at your mom. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she talented? Aren't we lucky?"
Wow.
And I never forget that. So my wife and I just celebrated 39 years. And every time I see my wife, I think, isn't she beautiful? Isn't she talented? Aren't I lucky?
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. This is the Scaling Culture podcast, but this is interesting. We have to kind of veer to, I need to dive a little deeper into a few things you said. One, I have a question, and this is more maybe on your childhood and your comment about your father never raised his voice at your mother. My first question is, did he raise his voice but not in front of you? Did he raise his voice, but did you not see it? Were you insulated from that?
I don't know.
Don't know.
I don't think so. If you asked me to place a bet in Vegas, I'd say no. It just wasn't his nature.
Wow, interesting. Because I go back to my relationship with my wife, and she would say the same thing about her parents. They did a phenomenal job in not arguing, bickering so much in front of her when she was growing up. And when we had our first dispute, our first argument, she really thought that was dysfunctional. Now, I grew up in a different, in a different household where there was different levels of dysfunction, I'll call it. And so what I said to her is, well, I think that your parents probably did argue, just not in front of you. And so I was curious when you said that, did your dad say, but son, you're probably going to argue at some point, and here's how you should maybe have a compassionate argument? Was there programming, teaching around that does happen?
There's a difference between, raising your voice and conflict and argument. I mean, they argued all the time. They just never yelled at each other. It was always just very civil. I'll tell you, we would have various family reunions. And I remember the 5 of us were sitting there together. And the question came up, what was the greatest lesson Dad ever taught you? And it was my brother, Kim, who's the middle brother. He said, I think the most valuable lesson Dad taught us was how to love your wife.
How to love your wife. How
to love your wife. And it doesn't mean you don't disagree. Of course you're going to disagree. Of course there's going to be conflict. The thing is, you figure it out. And it doesn't have to be nasty. You don't have to raise your voice. It's a problem to be solved. Solve the problem.
I totally love that. It sounds easier said than done, but I love it, by the way. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, are there times when you've wanted to yell? Of course.
Where's your punching bag, Chester? No, I'm just teasing. So I want to go back to another comment. People would have thought they were the smartest person after meeting my father. They would have felt better after meeting about themselves after meeting my father. What did he do? Bring me in the conversation. How did that happen?
Yeah,
what did we learn from that?
Dad was really interesting, and he definitely passed it on to us. Dad was very curious, and he loved people, and he loved to hear your story. And I found, in our work in culture or leadership, and particularly in our latest book, Anxiety at Work, is, one of the biggest causes of anxiety is uncertainty. Like, I don't know what's going on. Well, one of the greatest attributes of a leader is simply be curious about your people. Do you know where they came from, how they got here, what they want to accomplish while they're here, and where do they want to be 3 to 5 years from now? I mean, knowing people's stories, I think, is a very powerful way to lead, because, you're going to manage me a lot different than you're going to manage you. The old adage, we treat everybody the same because that's fair, is stupid. You don't treat everybody the same. It's not fair to treat everybody the same. And so we talk a lot about healthy cultures as a place where I believe what I do matters and I make a difference. And when I make a difference, somebody noticed it and celebrated it. The power of the carrot, of gratitude. Well, the way you reward people is different depending on their background and their interests and their passions. The way that you lead people is different. We learned a great lesson from a basketball coach in East Orange, New Jersey, Billy Lovett, William Lovett, and remarkable leader. I mean, inner city, and you want to see passion and you want to see great basketball, go watch inner city basketball, because these kids just, it's all they think about. They fly to the ball. And the great thing about Billy is that every one of his kids went to college. And in many cases, they were the first kids in their family to go to college. And it was so interesting. And so I was mentoring the point guard for the, East Orange campus Jaguars, Jeffrey Duveston, number 3 in your program, but number 1 in your heart, right? I mean, he was our kid, and we cheered for him and laughed, and we would follow the game. So we were at an away game, and there's Coach Lovett, and his 3-point shooter was off. So he calls a timeout. He pulls him aside. He puts his arm around. He says, "Hey, listen, Aaron, don't worry about it. Have a seat. I'm going to need you." The kid was great, right? Sits down. Well, 5 minutes later, calls a timeout. He grabs his power forward and he just starts screaming at this kid. I mean, Ron, uncomfortable. I mean, it was a small gym. There weren't many people there. I mean, this was tear your face off a moment for this kid.
Publicly.
Oh, yeah. So after the game, I went up and said, "Hey, coach, quick question. 2 players. Is that fair?" And he looked at me and he laughed. He goes, "Hey, you got to know your players." He says, my shooter, tender soul. I can't tear he'd never show up again. He'd never make another shot. That other kid, it was so funny. He goes, he a knucklehead. He a knucklehead. He goes, if you don't say, that's the only way to get through to that kid. I said, "By the way, did you notice when they both went in, they both played great?" I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Know your players." So long story to get to the point that, know your players, know their story, know how to coach people. Some people you need to be tough. Other people you need to be tender. Agreed. And great leaders know the difference.
And I agree with your other comment before too. The other adage, the golden rule, treat people as you would like to be treated, is flawed. It should be treat people as they would like to be treated, right?
Yeah,
that's what you're talking about.
My dad's taken the golden rule was the guy that has the gold gets to make the rules. And he said, and just don't ever forget that.
Right. Good point.
Yeah.
And so let's go back to the books. You've got, your last 2 books, Leading with Gratitude, Anxiety at Work. Those are your latest, correct?
Yeah.
What's even before we dive into the books, Chester, what's driving you to write those books? It feels like there's these lessons from your father that you've adapted, want to share them with the world, but what's driving to write and push these messages out there?
Great question, Ron. Adrian and I are both very passionate about creating just great places to work. Again, where I feel like what I do matters. I'm emotionally engaged. I'm rewarded for my hard work, because we've all had jobs where that's not the case. And what really bothers me about those workplace environments is the ripple effect. The fact that when you are miserable at work, your odds of being miserable at home and making your family miserable and everybody that comes in contact with you miserable go way up. And the opposite is true. And that's the ripple effect that we're really focused on, is that, when you send your people home happy, when work is engaging and rewarding, you think you're making a difference. Well, you're making a difference. And you share that with your family, it's the tide that raises all ships. It's interesting. I have this little tradition. I put these little gratitude stones in my pocket. I know this is a podcast, but
I love it.
It's a little polished stone. It says gratitude on it. I always keep a couple in my pocket, and whether I'm at a gas station or I'm flying or anywhere, and somebody does something great, I said, "Hey, by the way, thanks so much for the great service and really taking care of me. I got a little gift for you." And in a lot of cases, "Oh, sir, we can't take tips," whatever. I said, that's not it. I said,
"It's a rock."
Yeah, seriously, it's a rock, right? I said, "It's a little gratitude stone, and I just want you to have it because I really appreciate, you really took care of me. It's clear that you love what you do. It's important that what you do." And then I say, "And do you know why it's a stone?" And they go, "No." And I said, "Well, when you throw a stone in the pond, what happens to the water?" They say, "Oh, it ripples." I said, "Yeah, just like gratitude." And they go, "Oh, that's good. Yeah." And so my point is that we're passionate about what we do because you spend so much time at work that if you can make that engaging and rewarding, you can make lives engaging and rewarding. You're a better father, you're a better husband, you're a better neighbor, you're a better friend when you're happy.
I think that's a beautiful story. I think two things, actually. I'm going to order a lot of those stones. I'm going to save a lot of money, but I'm going to make a lot of people happy. I am going to pass on gratitude, but save money at the same time. There'll be no more tips. But seriously, that's beautiful. It is beautiful. I mean, you think of the simplicity of that, right? Of you could have easily tipped that person $5. Fine, they couldn't take, but they finally take it, and nothing changes. No story. The story and the impact of what you've done there should entail ripple, because there's no way I would bet, if I was in Vegas betting, that person tells a story. They tell the story, and not just once, and they don't just show the rock once, right?
It's so funny. I was on a flight, and this flight attendant was just, taking care of everything and everybody, and with a big smile on her face. And, I caught her in the back, and I said, hey, she goes, oh, I love these. I've got a rock that says peace. I've got a rock that says humility. This is going to fit right in, performers and whatnot. And he says, hey, I'm going to put this right near my, stand. And people do, like you say. And isn't it interesting, the power of a story? Back to, hey, what's your story? If I'm your leader, I should know your story. Where'd you come from? How'd you get here? Where do you want to go?
So high level, let's go to anxiety at work, because I think it's, it's an elephant in the room in some cases, right? I think that a lot of leaders don't want to talk about it because they believe that the discussion about what's causing anxiety could be crossing the line, could be driving drama, whatever it is, right? What do you think generalizes causing anxiety at work? Is it back to what you said on just uncertainty? What's causing anxiety?
There are a lot of factors, and we took a really deep dive. Now, I love all that preamble, because the reason we wrote this book was because of Adrian's son, Anthony. So I've known Anthony since he's 6 years old. I've known him for 20 years, and always kind of an anxious kid. And it was so funny, we launched Leading with Gratitude, which by the way is our favorite book of all the books we've written, and we've written 14 now. That's my favorite. And Adrian's favorite. Our most important book is Anxiety at Work. And it's because of Anthony. He said, you guys talk about leadership and culture. Do you ever talk about mental health? Do you ever talk about anxiety? Oh, no. Come on. Our generation, rub some dirt on that. Turn that frown upside down. Come on, suck it up. We wouldn't talk about mental health because why? You'd be perceived as weak. Real men, real leaders. They're not anxious. They power through, And he said,
compartmentalize.
Exactly. And we all die young of ulcers, bleeding ulcers. Anyway, he said, you oldies never talk about it, which I appreciated him calling us, oldies. He said, my generation, we start every conversation saying, how are you doing? And what we mean by that is, how's your mental health? Right. Because, to use the Disney analogy, my generation, we don't talk about Bruno. We just don't. This generation, that's all they talk about. And when you look at the future of business, you look at the future of leadership, you got to address it. Now, I'll share with you some numbers just really quick, because we said, okay, we'll take a look. If we find it interesting, maybe, Well, pre-pandemic, about 18% of employees said they had an anxiety disorder. So 1 in 5, call it 1 in 5. By 2022, that's 30%. That's a huge jump. Employees in their 20s, it's 42%. You're approaching half. This is your bench.
That's your workforce.
Exactly. And then get this, 50% of millennials and 75% of Gen Z said they have left a job due to a mental health issue. So it doesn't mean that they're not capable, not competent, not smart. In fact, I guarantee your top performers, guarantee you they suffer from anxiety, and always have, by the way, just really good at hiding it, right? So we took a look at it and said, well, isn't that interesting? Because if 42% of your workers in their 20s showed up with a broken leg, boy, you'd be all over that. You say, what the heck's going on? And yet there's still that stigma. So in the book, we took a deep dive into 8 strategies, how you deal with it, how you spot it. The big 3, though, is for leaders is how do you normalize the conversation? It's just like a broken leg. How do you destigmatize?
So just
the issue?
How do you make it safe to talk about, right?
Exactly. And then thirdly, how do you empathize? 5 years ago, Ron, if you'd said, what are the attributes of a great leader? I'd have said, great communicator, motivator, visionary. Right now, look, if you don't have a big dose of empathy, doesn't matter. Your people have to believe that you care about them. I was at speaking at a conference recently. We were doing all these workshops and stuff. And I said, so how long have you been here with this group? She said, just about 1.5 years. I said, where did you come from? She mentioned the company. I said, well, why did you make the switch? She said, because I went to my boss and we were doing really well, really successful company. And I said, listen, I've got somebody on my team that has lost, wait for it, 5 members of her family to COVID. 5. She's burned out. She needs some time off. She needs to go to funerals. And my boss said, yeah, I get that that's hard. We got a deadline. Can you make sure she's back by Monday?
Ouch.
And she said, at that moment, I decided I'm out. And she said, look, it wasn't that I didn't love what I was doing. I did. And I did love my team. I just didn't like who I was doing it for. She goes, now I'm at this new group and they actually care about me.
As a person.
And not just my immediate supervisor, right from the CEO all the way down. How are you doing? How are you taking care of yourself? You're putting your oxygen mask on first, the old analogy. And we're killing it. And I'll never leave. Now, she might get a new boss and that might change. My point is you get smart people, you want to develop them and you want to keep them. And you don't want them to quit because, by the way, if it's not safe to talk about mental health, it's easier for me to quit, take a couple of weeks off and just go find another job.
Absolutely. But Chester, are you saying that empathy through communication drives safety? Break down the safety part. How do you get people being that comfortable to say, look, I'm struggling with my mental health today, which is different than, something's going on at home, right? To actually label it.
Yeah. Or, like a friend of mine said, by the way, I was chasing our puppy. He went left, I went right, and I tore the meniscus in my knee. I need some time off. You go, we laugh about that and go, yeah. Take 2-3 days. Don't worry about it. Right. But if he said, you know what, I'm just overwhelmed. I'm just, as Winston Churchill would say, the black dog is back and I need some time. We'd go, I kind of told you this was going to be a high pressure job. Are you telling me you're not tough enough, Ron? You're not up to it. Come on. So you're right. The big question is, so how do I make it safe? Because here's another number for you. 90% of employees don't feel safe talking about it. 90%. So only 1 in 10 are feel confident enough or have a good enough relationship to say, you know what, Ron, I'm burned out, man. I'm just burned out. I need a day.
But then if they're the outlier, and I'm just normalizing here, generalizing, but in a lot of cases, the outlier probably seems as the drama starter, the person who's oversharing and probably labeled as that in some cases. Or would that be accurate?
In a lot of leaders' worlds, yeah. And those are leaders that don't know their people and don't know their story. So we say, look, how do you make it safe? That's the big question, right? Nabila Extalaban is a wonderful, you should have her on your podcast, by the way. She's the chief people officer for Walmart Canada. And she introduces herself as a recovering workaholic.
Ooh.
And because she was so driven to succeed, and she worked at Starbucks and a bunch of big brands, that her anxiety levels were off the charts, didn't sleep, didn't eat well, cost her marriage. And she said, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Now, wait for the story, because I think this is the crux of what we're talking about. She said, I was sharing this story with a group of employees, and they said, well, easy for you to say that now. You're in the C-suite. You're the chief people officer of 100,000 people in Canada. Do you think you would have gotten where you are today had you not made those sacrifices? And I loved her answer. She said, absolutely I'd be here. It would have taken me longer. And knowing what I know now, I would make that trade. So one of the ways that you make it safe is you share your story. Look, everybody's been anxious. That's a normal human emotion. And if you haven't ever been anxious at work, well, there's something seriously wrong with you, or you're a liar, or both, right? So the point is if you can find ways to share your story of times when you were overwhelmed and where you just, and how your boss understood that and made it possible. Once people say, oh, you mean you? Like you really? Well, if you felt it, and then it's probably okay. And then the other thing that we tell leaders is, by the way, when people finally feel safe to talk to you about mental health, they don't want you to solve the problem. Like seriously, they just want you to do one thing and one thing only. What do you think that is?
Listen.
Absolutely. Because leaders go, okay, so I made it safe, and then they're going to come to me with their problems, and then I got to have a solution, and I can't write a prescription, and I don't have a couch, and say, you don't have to do that. You don't have to have any of that. Just listen. And just say, hey, I know that's hard. I don't know exactly how that feels. I have felt like that. And I know it's hard. How can I help?
Right.
Now, the way that when you see somebody suffering and you want to make it safe, you don't come up and say, hey, Ron, I read this book, Anxiety at Work. You check all the boxes, man. You are seriously anxious. Don't worry. I'm here to listen. It doesn't work like that, right? What you do is you say, look, I've noticed, you know what, Ron, I've just noticed that your level of excellence has just been slipping a little bit. How can I help? How can I help? I've noticed that you're never late, man. And all of a sudden you're kind of showing up late. How can I help? So I've noticed. Now, so we talked to counselor and he said, why is that a safe way to start the conversation? And they said, well, because when you say I've noticed, it gets interpreted as I care. I've been paying attention. I've noticed. I care. How can I help? So, these little sort of, call them tricks or hacks or suggestions, whatever. Because back to, I was just doing this the other day. I said, how many of you have people on your team that are just killing it? Oh, yeah. They're just never fail, always come through. Yeah. And what do you do with those people on your team? They go, load them up.
100%.
Because they never say no and they always get it done, right? I guarantee you they're your most anxious because they never want to disappoint you. And be really careful with that because you'll burn them out.
Remember the days when company culture was defined by how many foosball tables and weekly happy hours there were? Today, employees expect more. That's why Empyrean empowers organizations to build a better culture by connecting employees to meaningful, life-enriching benefits. Benefits that allow your employees to be their best selves, both in and outside the workplace. Is your benefits function positively impacting company culture? Take Empyrean's online benefits maturity assessment to see how you measure up and where you can take a more strategic approach. A better workplace culture starts with benefits. So visit goempyrean.com to take the assessment and start building a better culture through benefits that actually matter. Empyrean, where real benefits live.
You talked about being vulnerable first. We had a guest, John Ferguson. He's a CHRO at NASCAR. And I love the verbiage and the labeling to that. He said, leaders need to lower the waterline first. I love that he used that. And you're talking about humanizing, a leader because we're seen as these tough leaders and who somehow have figured life out. And so what you're saying is, look, you need to connect through your own vulnerability to the person in front of you.
Yeah, listen, it comes back to stories, right? Just share your story.
Right.
Share your story.
Right, because everyone's story's got ups and downs.
Exactly. Listen, I remember when Adrian and I started talking about going out on our own. We worked for a bigger company and it was a good gig. They paid us well, all kinds of safety nets. Going out on your own, that's scary. I mean, it's really scary. And I remember it was my wife said, hey, let's go for a walk. I said, geez, I don't know if I got time. Don't know. Go for a walk. And she said, Chess, look, you are miserable. And one of the tips she gave me, she said, "Hey, you got to stop yelling in the shower. You're scaring the kids." You replay those conversations, and or worse is when you're in the car and you end up going, 90 miles an hour in a school zone because you're just so crazy. And we went for a walk, and she said, "You know what, Jess? I don't care what we do going forward. I'm telling you, we're not doing this anymore. Like you are leaving. Just figure it out. And I don't care what we do, but we're not doing this." And so we did. We went in, and it was really hard. The company didn't see it coming and was mad at us and couldn't get us out the door fast enough. And I remember coming back after that meeting, and my wife gave me a big hug and said, "Welcome back." Wow. So again, it's priorities. I mean, we were doing really well. We'd written all these books and speaking all over the world and everything. We've got a great quote that we try to live by, and it goes like this. It's a guy named David O. McKay who said, "No success in business can ever compensate for failure in your home."
Right. Love that.
And, and it was that this is when you marry well, right? When she pulled me aside and said, "Look, stop, just stop. I know you love the company." We actually wrote an article about this. Did very well, by the way, on LinkedIn. It was, I know you love the company. A company can't love you back. And so you got to take your love somewhere else. They don't get you. They never will. And that's not saying that they're not good people or they're bad people. In fact, the company we left is doing great without us. They didn't, you have that sort of death wish. Well, when I leave, you'll regret it. This is so silly, right? They're doing great. And the fact that they didn't get us, that's okay too. They get another way to do it that's just as good and just as effective. And took us a long time to come to grips with that. But, this idea of mental health is, you got to figure it out. That's why I'm a big fan of rituals. And we talk about that a lot in the book, your gratitude stone, your gratitude journal. I mean, we have 8 strategies in dealing with anxiety. The 8th strategy is gratitude, right? You can't be in a state of gratitude and a state of anxiety at the same time. So what are you doing to keep yourself in a healthy mental place? Are you saying your prayers? Are you reading your scriptures? Are you going for walks? Are you surrounding yourself with good people? Are you writing in a journal? We have a podcast, Anxiety at Work, and we always ask our guests, what are some of the things you do to keep yourself mentally healthy? And a lot of the things I just mentioned are on the list. One of my favorites was one of our guests says, "I multitask." I go, "What?" I would think your anxiety and your stress would go.
Right.
She goes, "When I'm multitasking, I'm sowing the weeds. I don't have time to be anxious." That works for her. And I went, "Good for you. You figured it out."
Is that look, as I hear that, I feel the same way you probably did. Is that a coping mechanism? Are you just blocking it out versus dealing with it? Although I guess everything else is too. If I'm going to write in a journal, I'm blocking out that anxious feeling because I'm writing my gratitude about my day. And so it's just I guess it is just a coping strategy. Right?
They're all coping mechanisms, right? I mean, it's really interesting. I read a wonderful book called Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty. A great book. In fact, Jay Shetty endorsed Leading with Gratitude. So we're grateful for that. And he said, "What's your mantra?" Monks have mantras. And so when you wake up in the morning and your feet touch the ground, what's your mantra? And I thought, that's good. I'm gonna develop a mantra, because there are days, different countries, different time zones, different thing, and it wears you out, And there are those mornings when you kind of go, "I'm not sure I really want to get out of bed," And of course you have to. So how do you trick yourself to get out of bed? So my mantra is very simple. It's be kind, be grateful, and be of service. And if I can go through the day and be kind and express gratitude with my little stones or thank you cards or whatever it is, and I've served somebody, that's a good day. That's a good day.
It's funny. I was just thinking about something similar. I was traveling the other day, and I think energy is a big thing. And I think if you're doing those 3 things, you're going to give off some pretty great energy. And I was just thinking about my day as I was traveling through an airport and the amount of people I was purposely making eye contact with and smiling. right? And I was just like, there's not a lot of people do that, and sometimes it's an awkward, you cross eyes and lock eyes and it's awkward. And I was noticing my own behavior of locking eyes, acknowledging and smiling. And I thought, not only would it bring a smile to someone's face 99% of the time, but it was giving me energy. It was making me feel great.
So I'm reading a wonderful book by a guy named Arthur Brooks. Listen to his podcast. He's brilliant. He teaches a course at the Harvard School, at Harvard College on happiness. I mean, come on. And it's, by the way, the most popular course at Harvard. And he writes in his book, Love Your Enemies, a chapter on a study was done in 1993 about forcing a smile. Said, and it's a wonderful quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, sometimes joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile is the source of your joy. And these studies they did, they made people watch videos and stuff, and they said, and you have to smile, even if you don't feel like it. And they measured all the endorphins and stuff like that. Even when it was a fake smile, it had a positive impact. This young woman that's in my congregation, she said, oh yeah, that's laugh yoga. I went, what? She goes, there are laugh yoga classes where you sit together and they make you laugh. And at first it's the last thing you want to do, and it's fake. And she said, and 5 minutes in, everybody's laughing hysterically and everybody feels great. So I love your forced smile. Now, if you want to have some even more fun with that, and again, this is a podcast, but I am obviously follically challenged, right? And so there are so many young people that have just fabulous hair, whether it's the dreadlocks or the extensions and all that kinds of stuff. You want to cheer somebody up, and I do this all the time, is I'll say, hey, excuse me. And they go, yes. I go, great hair. And they laugh, and they laugh. Exactly, that's the reaction. And you know what? They go, thanks. Because, clearly when they've got all this stuff, they've spent hours putting that thing together. Right? And I say, listen, if I ever get cancer and I want somebody to donate their hair, can I have yours? And they'll laugh. It's a simple little thing. Right. Hey, great hair. Another one is, it's really funny. I said, what, can I just tell you something really quick? And usually if they're in the service industry, it's like a complaint. So you just see them bracing themselves, right? Can I tell you something really quick? Go, yes. What is it, sir? I go, you've got a great smile. And they smiled big and said, you really do. Don't waste it. And they go, oh, thank you so much. And then you move on. It takes you a matter of seconds. Last story on hair. I had to catch a really early flight. And so I'm calling the Uber, and, it's like 4:00 in the morning. And the guy at the desk, that's the shift nobody wants, right? And he's got this great hair, all these extensions and stuff. He looks like, a rock star. And he doesn't want to be there. And I didn't want to have to get up that early. I had to. And I said, hey, I wonder if you could help me just really quick. I want to make sure I get the address right. It was a hotel in kind of a funky address. And he goes, yeah, that's it. He'll get you there. And I said, just one last thing. He says, yeah. I said, man, that's great hair. And he just started laughing. He goes, thanks, man. I needed that. I said, but seriously, you worked hard at that. He goes, every day, baby. This is my artwork. Well, not only did it cheer up his day and cheer up my day, he came around the counter and made sure that the Uber guy found me. Right. So again, that ripple effect, and it costs you nothing. It costs you absolutely nothing.
So is that one of the concepts in the book, Chester, is just as a leader, because we have to lead this, it's just these simple, small smile, compliment someone's smile, like these small little movements, which have massive impacts?
Yeah, I like to call them random acts of kindness. We did a study. It was another book we wrote called The Best Team Wins. We did a study of the NASA space station. The commander of the International Space Station, whose name just popped out of my head. Anyway, he's Canadian. So Adrian and I love him because he's Canadian. And they had the most successful 3 months ever. And they asked him, well, what was the difference in the debrief? He said, look, we trained for 12 years. Chris Hadfield is his name. He said, I think the difference was because, 3 cosmonauts, 2 astronauts, the Canadian, right? He said, we had an unwritten rule, and the unwritten rule was we had to perform a random act of kindness for each other every day. Every astronaut. Now, they didn't have a chart with little stars on it, although that would have been cool, right? He said, and what's the message? Little random acts of kindness. The message is, hey, I'm paying attention. I care about you. You're on my team. I'm cheering for you. I love you, right? Little random acts of kindness. Now, he said, what was the ripple effect? Never had a heated argument. Back to Dalton and Irene. Never raised their voices. We never had a heated argument. We never screamed and yelled at each other. Nobody had hurt feelings. It was just all about the mission, get the job done. Hey, we're all in this together. A simple random act of kindness.
Right. And to be honest, I love that it's not tracked, because then it seems transactional. It seems forced,
Right.
I had read a book. I took my kids to a place called the Discovery Center, and there was this beautiful white book, and it was called Joyful. Have you heard of that book?
No.
It's excellent. It's very similar to what we're talking about. It basically challenges some mental health, some of the theory on mental health. And basically what it says, Chester, is that, there's different aspects that affect your mental health, i.e. if someone smiles at you, if you see a bright color, if you see a little baby laughing, a rainbow, in those moments, it's pretty hard to be down. And, we loved at my real estate company. We, from there, picked 12 building block bright colors and have started to, we own multi-unit workforce housing, started to paint the colors of the doors inside the buildings, the exterior door in the hallway, very bright colors, just to give you a pop, And so I really believe in that. I think that your exterior has a huge impact, but the message that I'm hearing you say is that with leaders, I think a lot of leaders take that for granted, how impactful a smile, a compliment, those random acts of kindness go. I think it's just like, look, we're here for business, get in business, and then I'm gone. I just think that's how you change the world, that it's these small acts of kindness.
Yeah. And I would admonish the listeners, every now and again, you get an impulse, inspiration. I'm very religious. I think it's my God talking to me that says, hey, do something nice. Just do it. And often we go, no, it'll be awkward. It'll be weird. And I have to tell you, yesterday it happened to me. I'm on this interfaith council in my town. So we were meeting at one of the churches. And I'd never been to this church before. I knew it well. I'd just never been inside. We've lived in our town for, 30 years. And as I'm looking for the entrance and going around, there's this old car. And clearly this couple is living in that car. And I don't know how they got on that street or what the deal was. And I took note of it and I walked by. And there was a little voice that said, just do something nice.
Right.
And I remember thinking, I know I've got $20 in my wallet. And I turned around and I said, hey, I was wondering, can I help? And I passed him $20. And he looked at me and I'm telling you, Ron, he goes, why? Like literally he said, wow, thank you so much. I love you, man. I love you, man. Now, think about that for a minute.
Right.
When was the last time you could have that kind of impact on somebody for $20? And I remember thinking as I walked away, I remember just saying a little prayer of thanks. Thank you. Thank you for that little prompt.
Well, we had Canadian Thanksgiving last weekend that just passed. And, this is interesting because I think the feeling of that for younger people is confusing. And my story is my daughter, Georgia, who's 6. She has this big dollhouse, and then she got a second dollhouse. It was like there was a Barbie dollhouse, and then she got this LOL dollhouse. She had 2 in a room. And I said, gee, I think we should find someone to give that one of your dollhouses to. And of course, right away, like, whoa, daddy, whoa, a lot of Barbies are going in there. I don't know. I don't like this. And I said, Georgia, one of the beauties of life, one of the ways to fill your soul is to make other people feel good. And I think we should find a family and give that dollhouse to them. And we talked a lot about this. There was a lot of weeks that were leading up to this. And we found a family through a group called Add Some House, where it's typically abused women that they shelter. And there was a young lady that had 4 kids, and just on Monday, actually, 3 days ago, we took this dollhouse to the house, and my daughter, we talked a lot about it, and she started to get excited, tell people what she was going to do. And then she was like, well, what do you think the girls will think? And I said, well, you just see how those little girls feel. And of course, the girls were smiling ear to ear. Oh my God, is this ours? Do we get this? And my daughter, I could just see this registering, like it was a little confusing for her. It was, do I feel good about this? Wow, this is kind of good. It was really interesting watching a 6-year-old digest this in real time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what a great life lesson.
Yeah.
You know, hey, there's people out there that, it's so interesting. Like, we write business books, and Adrian and I are always very careful. Hey, you should read Leading with Gratitude for Families. You go, no, we got no credibility in that space. Nobody's gonna buy a book from Chester Elton on how to be nice to your kids or whatever. We almost end every book. In fact, most of our books, we say, by the way, these principles, take them home. Leading with Gratitude. I mean, we interviewed Ken Chenault. He just retired as the CEO of American Express, one of the great leaders in American Express history. Alan Mulally, who saved the Ford Motor Company, right, during the recession in the 2000s, 2008 to 2010. They all said, you know what, this is the way we lead, and this is the way we live. We absolutely practice this with our families. So one of our great little ending lines that we love to use is say, by the way, you lead with gratitude. You'll be a better leader. You'll get superior results. No doubt about it. It's not just a better way to lead. It's a better way to live. Don't forget to take it home. How are you doing this with your kids? How are you doing this with your spouse? When was the last time you wrote a love letter to your spouse? When was the last time you thanked a teacher or a coach or your minister? That little bit of gratitude goes a long way. And, it's so interesting. I'll get some pushback. We were doing this thing over the weekend, and it was this big panel, and it was too many people on the panel, and it was too long. But other than that, it was a great webinar. And we were talking about this, and I talked about the spiritual side. I said, people need to connect spiritually. And I said, look, I don't mean that, which church do you go to, or discipline, or what scriptures do you read? If you do that, great. That's what I do, and it works for me. I said, people want to connect spiritually. In Japan, they talk about forest bathing, where they walk through the forest and they just connect with nature, and it replenishes their soul. I said, even my friends that are diehard atheists, we'll sit on a dock on a clear night and look up at the stars, and I'll nudge them and go, seriously? Like, this doesn't, come on. I've got a friend who's has a really interesting family background. Anyway, she's quite an artist. And she said, my father died an atheist. My brother died an atheist. And I want to write a poem that says, 2 atheists meet in heaven. What do they say to each other? And so you can joke and you can laugh about it. I honestly think that, don't forget, call it the emotional side, call it the spiritual side. One of the things that helps me with my mental health, and it helps me be a better father, a better husband, a better neighbor, is I believe that there's a power greater than I am, right, and that I can connect with it, and that I am never alone. And that is such an important lesson for anxiety. Whether you're a leader, a coworker, or a friend, that if you know somebody that's suffering, is that they are not alone, and that you are there for them, and you will listen. You don't know exactly what they're going through. It doesn't matter. Just that they are not alone. Because when we retreat by ourselves and we start going down that rabbit hole, that's when it gets not just worse, it gets dangerous. And so whether you're connecting through your forest bathing or your meditation, your philosophy or your faith or the church you go to or the community that's around you, that's an important emotional, spiritual thing to tap into. And the best leaders do it. And they're not preachy about it. They just understand it. And they go, look, there's a spiritual side. It's what makes us different, and what makes us want to come together and to be kind and to be grateful and to be of service. And when you get that in whether it's at work, at home, or in your community, everything gets better. I promise you, everything gets better.
I feel like it's a big mic drop after that, by the way. Chester, thank you. But I was thinking, like, to scale this, right? Because it's one thing for me to smile at coworkers and ask them how they're doing. And maybe this is talked about in the book, is to scale it. Is it to talk about the impact and to encourage it? You know, I was reading an article, and this is just, I don't even know the magazine. I sometimes take pictures of great articles and I send it to my children. I have email accounts for all of my children in the future. And so Georgia James Lovett, I'll give her the password when she's 18. So I send pictures and videos and thoughts. And so the article's titled, "The Smallest Things Will Make You Happy." And a few things I'll just read out. Greet a stranger in an elevator. That's what you're talking about, right? Yeah. Imagine you've lost something or someone you love. And that's probably for gratitude, to feel grateful. It sounds aggressive, but I understand it. Knock off a menial task. Find little things that make you go, wow. I love that. Daydream about having superpowers.
I like that one.
Yeah, it's got a couple other strategies. I guess my question is, should we be teaching why we're doing things, encouraging others to do it? Is that the scale? Is that how we scale versus just hoping someone picks up on it and repeats it?
Yeah. So how did my father scale it through our family? I mean, the way he lived his life. And hopefully the way I'm living my life is going to help it scale through my kids. It's the same in business. You know, if I act that way and I'm the leader, I give everybody else permission to do the same. One of the great things, conversations with Alan Mulally, I just got such a kick out of. He said, you know, it's all about culture and it's all about people, and it always will be. And he said, you set the parameters, you talk about it, you teach it, you model it. And then, and I love this, he says, I've never had to fire anybody. He said, we had a CFO, guy was brilliant. Problem was he treated people like crap. And so I went to him and I said, listen, you're brilliant. You're more than capable. We're lucky to have you. The thing is that's not our culture anymore. We don't treat people like crap. You can't be yelling. You can't be dressing people down in public. And he says, now look, so this is where we're going. And I want you to come with us. Now, if you can't do it, this is where it's brilliant, right? If you can't do it, that's okay. I'll still love you and I'll wish you well.
Right.
In other words, you can't work here, you know? And he says, and I'll give you 2 months to figure it out.
Right.
And he said, and the guy did. And he said, and he came to me 2 months later and I check in with him. How you doing? How you doing? And he said, you know what, Alan, I just can't do it. He said, I know. And that's okay.
Now, what if he had came back as like the basketball coach and said, but let me tell you, I communicate to people and how they want to be communicated to. He would have said, but not here. You can't, unfortunately, right?
You know, one of the great legendary basketball coaches of all time, John Wooden. I remember watching John Wooden coach UCLA when I was a kid, because I played a lot of basketball as a kid. I was a basketball Jones. That's all I cared about. He rarely got up. If you watch film from UCLA games, you know, Bill Walton and Lou Alcindor and all the great players that he had playing for him, who's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I know you know that. Anyway, yep. He never got out of his chair. He rarely called timeout. I mean, he coached them up. They knew what they were doing. Do you ever remember a picture of John Wooden jumping up and screaming at one of his players? There are no photos of that. It never happened. In practice, maybe, right? Maybe that's where he got it on. Yeah, I mean, look, decide the team you want. You hire to fit. You set the parameters. You model the behavior. You talk about it all the time. And when there's somebody that doesn't fit, take care of it. Because when you've hired, and we've all made bad hires, and you've got a jerk on your team, the team blames the jerk until it goes on too long, and then they blame you because you could have taken care of the jerk and you didn't.
That's right.
So, I mean, we're off on a bit of a tangent here, but, you know, decide the culture you want. You may not want a culture of gratitude, and that's okay. I'll never work for you. And you know what? That's probably a good thing, right?
Right. But others will. They'll lean into it. They'll say, I don't want this. This is fluffy for me. I agree. I think you lean in, you make your decision, because otherwise you're going to cause anxiety and confusion, which is anxiety, right?
Spot on.
What's the next big topic coming? What are you seeing, Chester? If you were going to write a book tomorrow, what is the topic? What's the headline of that book?
You know, we're struggling with that one right now. I'll tell you what's interesting is people are dealing a lot with transition. You know, and right from early to late, right? Transitioning out of university into your first job, your first promotion. lot of, I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. We're all supposed to retire and do what? And do what?
Well, we could use a few of you at some of these workforce frontline positions, which we can't find people. So if you don't mind, get your friends to come back and do that.
Yeah. I've been working on my pitch. Can I biggie size that for you, sir? Yeah. And so I think, there's a lot of work to be done in transition to what's next. We're doing a lot of work with DE&I. And it's interesting that, you got these young startups, all these really smart young people in these tech companies, and they've got a lot of diversity of thought and maybe, gender and race and so on. We need diversity in generations. Like where are the gray hairs in the room that can help you walk through this stuff? Oh, it's all new. It's all exciting. He said, yeah, you know what? Life is life. You need a couple of gray hairs in the room, or no hairs, as the case may be, to help you through that. I think there's a big responsibility there in helping with transition. Mentoring. One of the things that Adrian and I are both doing right now that gives us great satisfaction is executive coaching. How do you walk people through? How do we make sure that you're not just a better leader, you're a better person? And so I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So what's the title? I don't know. I don't know what the title is. That's a lot. We're figuring it out, and I'll let you know when we get a publisher.
Well, Chester, look, obviously keep doing what you're doing. I said this, I think, before we started, but the world needs more Chester Elton it needs more in the world. We need more of you in our life. I think you're just a positive force. And obviously, even the color you have on, for those who are listening, Chester has bright orange glasses with a bright orange shirt. I mean, that is giving me energy. It's great. And so obviously you're very intentional about what you do on a daily basis. And so that's wonderful. And I want to thank your father and your mother, who obviously had a huge impact in who you are today. Yeah.
Well, thank you. You're very, very kind. And thank you for giving me your platform. You reach a lot of people, and it's a message, like you say, I don't think you can hear it too often. I don't think you can hear it too much. Nations are divided. People are divided, and we need more kindness in the world. We need more gratitude.
Just saying this too earlier, the world seems to be more accepting, but more critical. It's weird, we accept all these different things that are happening, but we're way more critical online. And
I know it was a great article I was reading. The guy says, so we need more tolerance. He goes, boy, that's a pretty low bar. If you said, my wife tolerates me, well, you'd immediately go to counseling.
Right.
My employees tolerate me. They go, come on, we've got to get to the International Space Station, right? Where it says, look, you're on my team. I'm cheering for you. You matter to me. I'm going to serve you. And the message is, I love you. We need more gratitude. We need more love. We just need to be kind to each other. And when we know each other's stories, I think it's easier to be kind.
Couldn't agree more. Chester, thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time, and always great to see you.
You too, Ron. Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
For more information about Chester and his books and work, please follow him on LinkedIn or go to chesterelton.com, ChesterElton.com. To learn more about our books or the Scaling Culture Masterclass, please go to scalingculture.org. And to learn more about the sponsor of this episode, Empyrean, please go to goempyrean.com. So it's GOEMPYREAN.com. And lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a comment and share the podcast with one of your friends or colleagues. We'll be back soon with another incredible guest.